Hello and welcome everyone to the first video in my new theory crafting series. As promised in my latest update video, I started talking with my stream about potential ideas for a new Final Fantasy XIV job a couple of weeks ago. After posing 4 different ideas between Corsair or Pirate, Onmyoji, Voidmeister, and Magitech Knight, those of you on Patreon voted for Corsair. After deciding on which job to focus on, I spent the next stream brainstorming themes for potential attacks, rotations, and abilities. Now I believe it's ready to start sharing with everyone here so we can get even further into the discussion. Just a heads up, this intro will be a little long since I want to make sure everyone here is clear about how this new format will play out. Future videos will be far more streamlined. Until then, your patience is appreciated. For anyone out of the loop, I'll quickly reiterate the purpose of this series and how it will play out in its current form. I eventually want to be a game designer in a creative director position. That has been my ultimate goal for over a decade. I want to improve my creative thinking and team building ability to either show off to companies I want to work for or to take this experience with me when I start my own studio. We've had great success with this discussion format on the channel in the past, so I want to build on that. As to how this series will unfold, I start on my Twitch streams where we brainstorm general job ideas live. Patreon then votes on what job to focus on. Then I will bring the rough idea to you here on YouTube. After that, we will go back and forth between Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube videos until we reach the final iteration of a job. The final video will have Japanese subtitles, but transcribing that is far too expensive to do for every single video right now. As I mentioned, this is the first time doing an actual series of videos like this, so it's not going to be perfect. Comments like, "You should have thought of this adjustment beforehand," and general statements expecting immediate perfection, however, are not realistic, nor helpful. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to add a disclaimer. I, DrakGamestein, am in no way, shape, or form affiliated or associated with Square Enix, Final Fantasy XIV, or the Final Fantasy XIV development team. This is a fan Theorycraft for fun and, hopefully in the future, my game design portfolio. The ideas suggested here are not indicative of jobs to come in the future of the game. Anything we discuss here that might be added to Final Fantasy XIV would be at the discretion of the Final Fantasy XIV team. I had to get that out of the way because there are a good number of well-meaning but ultimately misguided individuals in the Final Fantasy XIV community who are a bit, rabid when it comes to what they perceive certain rules to be. Anytime the 14 team has to crack down on some bad actors, like with third-party add-ons, which I'm not personally against in 90% of the cases, these other individuals take it upon themselves to target content creators and streamers in hopes of catching us red-handed. So while I'm doing nothing wrong, I'd like to avoid giving them a chance to harass me in my comments and streams. So wouldn't it have just been easier to make a job from scratch without involving Final Fantasy XIV? Not exactly. I've selected Final Fantasy XIV as a framework for this discussion because I'm very familiar with the game with my 7 years of experience playing and rating in it. It also provides us with clear limitations and precedents that we can then refer to in order to streamline this process. It isn't impossible to be original with these discussions, but doing so would require us to build a framework and engine from the ground up, which I believe is a little bit too advanced for us right now. Someday though. Now then, let's actually begin this thing. As I mentioned before, we will be focusing on Corsair for the first series. And no, this video is not sponsored by Corsair, the manufacturer. We're talking about Corsair, the pirate. Our goal while discussing this was to see how versatile we could make a job beyond anything we've seen in the game so far. As it stands, Corsair will be a dexterity-based job using scouting gear. For weapons, it will dual-wield a cutlass and flintlock pistol. These weapons will be combined like ninja daggers, which will make it easier to differentiate them from machinist's pistols. As a side note, this issue of differentiating the weapons is rather minor since all they have to do is classify these weapons differently to make it work within Final Fantasy XIV's weapon system. For example, machinist weapons are labeled machinist's arms, and if we only had Corsair using pistols, we could just simply call them pistols, which would avoid the issue entirely. I only mention this because it was a point of contention for a few people in the livestream discussions. So they use a melee and ranged weapon, which begs the question of, which role will they fill? By default, we landed on Corsair being a physical ranged, but performing as a pure hybrid. Where Red Mage and Paladin have melee and ranged phases, Corsair would be able to freely choose between melee and ranged, similar to Astrologian's diurnal and nocturnal stances. But how does that actually work? Well, right now they will have a simple combo for both ranged and melee attacks, and a gauge of some kind for each. Changing your stance would change your main combo from one to the other to prevent button bloat. Ranged attacks would fill the melee gauge, which would grant an empowered melee combo, and vice versa. At the moment, the empowered combos would upgrade from the basic combo and give the Corsair a second weapon of each type. So for an empowered melee combo, they would bring out another cutlass and deliver a flurry of swashbuckling slashes. Empowered ranged combos would give a second pistol for gunslinger attacks that'd make Dante weak in the knees. This ensures that they can always make use of their kit while solo. But what about in party play? While dungeons don't really require much coordination, raids certainly do, and being able to evenly split up the party based on who needs uptime and who is ranged is usually very important. In these instances, the Corsair can fill either melee or ranged roles. That, of course, raises the issue of how they fill their gauges in that situation. The answer is by assigning a first mate. First mate is a buff similar to Dance Partner, where you would ideally select a party member of the opposite role. That is, if you plan on playing more as a ranged, you would pick a melee job as your first mate. Their attacks then would fill your ranged gauge. Same with melee. Pick a ranged player as your first mate so they can fill your melee gauge. To prevent the empowered combo from interrupting the normal combo, there can be abilities that are only available when a gauge is full, called Unsheath and Unholster for the cutlass and pistol respectively. Along with filling the melee and ranged gauges, Corsair's combos will work towards another job gimmick, Treasure Hunter. There are a few variations we have to choose from, but each follows the theme of filling a sort of treasure gauge, which will lead to uncovering and opening a treasure chest. Upon opening the chest, the party could be buffed or the boss could be damaged. The first version of Treasure Hunter has Corsair add an item to the chest every time they finish a combo, or unlock the use of an ability after the combo. The ability in question would function like Dancer's Steps, only customizable like Ninja's Mudras or Samurai's Sen. Alternatively, completing a combo could cause loot to drop from the boss that the Corsair would then run around to pick up depending on what they needed. Depending on the treasure added to the chest, the effect it has when opened will change, such as a damage boost for the party, coins bursting out to attract mercenaries, or you could curse the chest to turn it into a mimic that attacks the boss. The more that is added to the chest, the stronger the effect when opened, similar to Zidane's treasure ability from Final Fantasy IX. The second version of Treasure Hunter revolves around finding a key for the chest. Corsair can discover a key through their rotation, or later have the ability to send an Oppo Oppo or Colibri friend to go search for them, which would then reduce the time needed. We're gonna put a pin in the Animal Friends idea for now, but just know they'll be coming back when we start talking about AOE rotations and OGCDs. The third and final option, so far, is strictly a treasure gauge that somewhat combines the first couple versions. Through the rotation and other abilities, Corsair will fill the gauge, which fills the chest. The chest can be opened at any time, but gets stronger the more is in it. The Corsair's 120-second cooldown would fill the gauge by a significant amount, or completely. Now for our AOE rotation. At range, the Corsair will throw a flaming bottle of rum at the enemies, setting them on fire. The next step will roll a powder keg at the enemies, exploding on impact. Finally, you will send out your parrot or colibri friend to carpet bomb them with little grenades. At melee range, Corsair will deliver an attack via blunderbuss, followed by a swig of rum turned into fire breath, and finished off with a series of flaming sword slashes. As for off-global cooldown abilities, or OGCDs, we did our best to stick with the pirate theme. One will have the Corsair bring out a cannon out of nowhere, Joy style, and fire it off at the targeted enemy. As you level higher, your Oppo Oppo and parrot friends can manage it autonomously, with the parrot bringing ammo and the Oppo Oppo firing it multiple times. Think the original Livia fight in Castrum. Alternatively, you could have them each fire off their own cannons for a more immediate increase in damage. The next idea was to throw loaded dice that are literally loaded with gunpowder. Fairly self-explanatory, I think. Another ability would lay caltrops at the feet of your enemies for a dot and heavy. One idea was to have rum be a more recurring theme, with it granting certain benefits like damage up or vuln down. And I know that numbing pain with alcohol doesn't actually reduce the damage that you take, but that would be a possibility to flavor it. We could give Corsair a sea shanty to give the party a speed boost in combat, and a blank shot to fire in the air, which would give the party a damage or crit boost. Incorporating ideas like X marks the spot was suggested, where you would deal more damage for a certain amount of time wherever you applied the X on the enemy. This could also unlock some starboard, larboard, and such themed abilities based on which side was marked. For repositioning tools, Corsair could use mines like Overwatch's Junkrat to move around, or use an anchor to throw at an enemy to gap close to them. And finally, we've come to the limit break. Even though I said we would use Final Fantasy XIV as a framework and keep ideas contained to precedent, we got a little weird with this one. I figured if this is a physical ranged class that can be a melee, why not give it a caster style LB? The ideas we came up with were a giant ghost ship that would come in and fire cannons at the enemy, a massive cannon of your own, something like Balthier's level 3 mist attack, or tossing a cursed treasure like a trident at the enemy to attract the Kraken to attack them. There were other ideas, of course, but many would cause even more visual disruption, and we decided to avoid that as much as possible. Now, while I believe these ideas have some great merit, there are a couple issues to address as we move forward with this design. The first issue lies in the question of, why would you ever want to be a melee? Currently, every range class performs just fine regardless of the range from the boss. This could be alleviated by having melee combos along with who you've chosen as your first mate to give different loot to add to the treasure chest for various effects. That, or have certain buffs and debuffs only available when in melee stance. The next issue is a matter of having versatility, but being stuck to either ranged or melee for the most part once you've selected your role in your party. We could always add something to more heavily incentivize swapping between roles, but that could also reduce the true freedom of the versatility we're aiming for. Otherwise, each stance has to be interesting enough on their own without being too complex. High APM is something I'm completely fine with, as long as it's intuitive. The goal with these first couple videos will be to work through these problems as well as refine the other ideas mentioned earlier. But for now, that is all for the preliminary ideas for Corsair. Let me know what ideas you like, feel free to suggest your own, or explain why other ideas didn't resonate with you. As usual, be respectful but also thorough. I will do my best to address concerns and take feedback in stride. After we've discussed it enough in the comments, I will bring it back to stream to finalize some ideas before coming back here with a more refined version. Of course, thank you to all my viewers on stream and patrons who helped participate in the discussion so far. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm very glad to have a new way to interact with you more. I'm also very happy with what we've come up with so far, and I can't wait to see where this goes. As always, thank you for watching and hope you had fun. God bless you all, and I'll see you in the comments.